Hello, Sentinels! This is Universe Unique, and today the truth comes to light. There are still people who try to defend Amy Adams' Lois Lane. They say she was just more serious, more mature, more realistic. But let's face the facts. She was one of the most empty, faded, and forgettable versions in DC movie history. And the worst part? It wasn't her fault. It was the script that had no idea who the real Lois Lane was. If you enjoy analyses that don't sugarcoat things, that deliver everything based on reality and without fear of comparison, this is the right channel for you. We're close to reaching an important goal around here, and each new subscription makes a real difference. Subscribe now and become part of this community that wants a more coherent, bolder, and truer universe. Because in today's video, we will expose the glaring difference between two Lois Lanes. The one who seemed like a luxury extra in Snyder's films, and the one who finally brought the fire, ambition, and classic sarcasm of the character, with Rachel Brosnahan in charge. But what exactly makes this new Lois work so well? It's not just acting. It's not just charisma. It's construction. It's personality. And it's the courage to deliver a character that for a long time, Hollywood tried to soften. But there's a detail in this that almost no one noticed. And it changes everything. I'll show you later today. If this content is connecting you with the truths of the multiverse, go ahead and like it, and join our secret line of subscribers. Since their first appearances in the 1940s, Lois Lane was never written to be cute or easy to get along with. The essence of the character is conflicting. She is a brilliant journalist, but driven by an uncontrollable desire for recognition. She is obsessed with getting scoops, willing to risk her own life to get a headline, and not afraid to step on colleagues, or even her own principles, if it means being one step ahead. This is blatantly evident in various stages of the comics, such as in the New 52 era, when Lois publicly reveals Superman's identity without any remorse, or in Heroes in Crisis, by publishing confidential secrets of heroes in psychological treatment, just to get the scoop. And why does she do this? Because deep down, she doesn't trust anyone. Lois is marked by a kind of almost instinctive distrust, a direct result of her family traumas, especially the emotional absence of her military father. This is what makes her such a rich and contradictory character. She is not kind at first glance. She doesn't smile easily. She doesn't publicly reveal her humanity. Lois needs to feel safe to let her guard down. And that only happens with one or two people in her entire life. The rest of the world. She faces it with sarcasm, distrust, and an almost desperate urgency to prove she is the best at what she does. That's why, in terms of archetype, she resembles figures like the tsundere in anime. Tough on the outside, with hidden emotional layers that only appear when someone truly touches her emotionally. And this is not a superficial comparison. It is an effective way to explain why Lois always worked better when written with her flaws on display, because her charm is right there. She is not a traditional heroine. She is a complex woman, with ambiguous morals, but driven by a legitimate quest for truth and justice, a quest that often puts her on the ethical edge. But there is one thing that few writers understood, and that explains why so many adaptations have failed. In her very first appearance in Man of Steel, Amy Adams delivers a promising Lois Lane. The character ignores protocols, confronts a general, and risks herself in a hostile Arctic environment just to investigate an alien artifact. This scene has everything that defines Lois in the comics: courage, work obsession, and a complex relationship with danger. She almost dies in the Kryptonian ship, and only survives because Clark saves her. But the point here is that, narratively, this was a great start. It was where the character's classic personality seemed about to emerge. But that spark never turned into a flame. From then on, Lois exists as a satellite of the protagonist. We no longer see ambition. We no longer see moral dilemmas. The character does not grow, does not challenge the plot, and worse, does not have visible internal conflicts. Even when faced with the biggest journalistic scoop in history, discovering Superman's secret identity, she takes the decision to protect Clark and Martha without even hesitating. In any relevant character's comic book, This would be a moment of brutal moral crisis. The reporter who fought her whole life for recognition now needs to choose between glory and anonymity, between the headline and silence. But here, nothing. She simply accepts that she will give up everything, and the movie doesn't even bother to dramatize it. This erasure of Lois becomes even more evident in Batman vs. Superman. When Superman goes through an existential crisis after the attack on the Capitol, Lois is there, but not as an emotional anchor, nor as a moral counterpoint. She is just present, in silence, without speech, without impulse, without depth. What could have been one of the most important conversations between them, about faith, humanity, and responsibility, becomes a static scene where Lois's only action is to caress Clark's chest. And this lack of narrative agency is constant. Instead of confronting Superman, provoking reflections, or even doubting his choices, Lois is reduced to a privileged spectator of events. Even in moments of maximum tension, like the phrase, "No one stays good in this world," she remains silent. And there lies the irony. In the name of softening the character, the screenwriters simply erased what made her relevant. She ceases to be Lois Lane to become just Superman's girlfriend. And that changes everything when compared to what Rachel Brosnahan delivers. But before delving into that, there is a detail, and almost no one comments on why this approach failed so deeply. And it's hidden in the structure of the scripts themselves. In the first scene in which she appears in the new Superman, Legacy, Rachel Brosnahan's Lois Lane makes it clear that she did not come to repeat formulas. She is in the middle of the Daily Planet's newsroom, arguing with Clark Kent about the supposed privilege he receives from Superman to get exclusive interviews. And this detail, however small it may seem, already reveals a fundamental change. Because this Lois has an opinion, has restrained anger, has a sense of journalistic ethics, and does not hesitate to confront even her own boyfriend when she thinks he is bending the rules of the profession. This kind of attitude marks a return to the character's sharper roots. Here, Lois is not a woman in function of the hero. She has her own moral compass, albeit unstable, and her own obsessions. James Gunn's script does not try to make her more likable. On the contrary, it embraces the chaotic and contradictory side of the character. It shows that she is competitive, confrontational, and that behind the professionalism, there is a person who almost emotionally sabotages herself in the name of truth. And the script makes this explicit. When Lois is alone with Clark, she admits that her distrust of the world is almost pathological. That she became a journalist because she needed to understand what was hidden behind the facades. And that deep down, she knew that the relationship with Clark was not going to work out because she simply can't trust anyone. This is not just a catchy phrase. It is the soul of the character, verbalized with brutal honesty. Even the small visual details reinforce this, like the scene where she pours half a pot of sugar into her coffee, symbolizing the stress load, the frantic pace, and the need to keep the mind hyperactive all the time. James Gunn turns a comedic gesture into dramatic subtext. This is a Lois who doesn't sleep, who lives to work, who isn't trying to be nice, but true. And that's what makes this version so faithful to the comics. Because she wasn't made to please, she was made to provoke. And in this process, Rachel Brosnahan delivers one of the most complete characters in the new DCU. But it's not just because of the performance. There is another reason, more structural, that makes this Lois essential to the story. And I'll talk about it now. Because that's where Amy Adams lost the most space. Among all the possible contrasts between the two versions of Lois Lane, perhaps the most glaring one is in the way their relationships with Clark Kent are written. In the Snyderverse, Amy Adams and Henry Cavill share an aesthetic of the perfect couple, but empty of emotional substance. There is no bond building, no dialogues that reveal why exactly these two characters are together. The relationship emerges abruptly, marked by a kissing scene amidst the ruins of Metropolis, shortly after a mass destruction. It's almost surreal. Emotional intimacy is never built. What we see is a sequence of beautiful but shallow interactions, sustained only by a vague idea of love. And this problem worsens when the relationship is put to the test. In the most dramatic scenes of Batman vs Superman, Clark is in deep crisis, doubting his purpose, feeling like an imposter. It would be the ideal moment for Lois to show why he means something to her, but that never happens. She simply consoles him silently. There is no argument, no conviction, no motivation. Their relationship exists because the script demands it, not because the audience believes it should. Now compare that to what Rachel Brosnahan and David Corenswit deliver. The two argue, interrupt each other, disagree openly on stage. There is constant friction. Lois provokes, Clark hesitates. And that's exactly what makes the romance believable. Because they are not in love with an idealized projection. They are trying to understand each other within a real ethical conflict. Lois does not trust the world, and that includes the man she is with. Meanwhile, Clark insists on believing in the goodness of people. It's a direct clash of worldviews, and each of their lines in moments of tension clearly shows this. This is evident in the apartment scene, when Lois confronts Clark about the exclusive interviews he gives to Superman, who, of course, is himself. For her, that is not just an ethical breach. It is a professional betrayal. And she makes it clear, even knowing that it will generate friction between them. Because this Lois puts the profession above emotional comfort. And when they argue, the tension is not resolved with silence or with a convenient kiss. It is discussed, argued, felt. It's the kind of dynamic that turns the relationship into more than just a narrative ornament. It becomes a mirror of their own internal contradictions. Clark helps Lois believe that the world can be better. Lois reminds Clark that real kindness needs to be critical, not naive. They don't complete each other by being opposites. They challenge each other. And that's exactly why this relationship works, even if it's always on the verge of collapse. But there's another layer to this that few have noticed. A specific scene where Lois, without powers, saves Superman and completely redefines the character's role in the new DCU. I'll talk about it, because that's where everything changes. For decades, Lois Lane was treated as a narrative accessory. In the comics of the 40s, 50s, and 60s, her role was basically to be kidnapped, put in danger, and rescued by Superman. At most, she worked as comic relief, stumbling into absurd plans, or becoming obsessed with uncovering the hero's identity. It was only with John Byrne's revamp in the 80s that she gained a real function within the plot, acting as an active reporter and agent of transformation in the urban and political conflicts of Superman's universe. This narrative turn transformed her into a fully realized character with her own agency and importance. Lois was transformed from a passive supporting character into a strategic protagonist. In the Snyderverse, there was a superficial attempt to rescue this role. In Man of Steel, she is involved in the investigation of the mysterious man who saved her. There is even an efficient montage sequence where the discovery of Clark's identity serves as a bridge to his childhood flashbacks, a typical technique of Nolan's films. But after that, her participation dissolves. In Batman vs Superman, for example, her biggest narrative contribution is throwing a kryptonite spear into the water, and then being saved while trying to retrieve it. In Justice League, Lois serves only as an emotional anchor to calm down the resurrected Superman, a role that could be replaced by any other character close to him, like Martha, or even the memory of his father. Now, observe what Gunn does with the character. The new Lois Lane not only investigates, she drives the plot forward with concrete decisions. When she realizes that Superman is trapped in a pocket universe created by Lex Luthor, she doesn't wait for orders. She convinces Mr. Terrific and the Justice Group to invade the alternate dimension. It's Lois who orchestrates the operation, leads the search for clues, and finds loopholes in Luthor's plan. And most importantly, it is thanks to her actions that the portal back to Metropolis is reopened. All of this happens without her ever putting on a costume, without needing powers. She operates within the core of what has always been her main function, journalism and strategy, from the very beginning of the film. She is immersed in the investigation of the war in Baravia, and when she discovers that Luthor Corp is donating weapons, not selling them, she realizes there's something deeper behind it. It is Lois who connects the dots, who uncovers the relationship between Luthor's profit and his territorial ambition. And it's the article she dictates aboard the ship right before the climax that seals the villain's fate. It's not just a journalistic scoop. It's the definitive unmasking of Lex Luthor. While Superman defeats physical enemies, it's Lois who dismantles the moral and political legitimacy of the antagonist. The article published by the Daily Planet not only ruins Lex's reputation, it brands him a public traitor, severs his ties to the government, and restores society's trust in Superman. A complete narrative shift. It's the kind of protagonism the character has been lacking for decades. And it's also one of the central pillars of the new DCU, allowing classic characters to fully embrace the roles they've always had in the comics, but that cinema has often hesitated to portray. And perhaps the most curious part is that this new Lois proves you can save the world without ever leaving the newsroom. But there is still one missing piece to complete the puzzle. Because none of this would work if the relationship between Clark and Lois didn't have a solid foundation. However, the construction of this bond contains a detail that the Snyderverse never managed to capture. And it appears in an almost imperceptible gesture, which we'll now decipher. There's a scene in Man of Steel that had the potential to become a milestone in the construction of Lois Lane. After investigating the alien ship and being saved by Clark, Lois does what any real reporter would do when faced with the greatest event in modern history. She starts investigating. She maps out routes, interviews locals, connects the dots, and arrives in Smallville, where she uncovers Superman's true identity. At that moment, she holds the biggest scoop of all time in her hands, the opportunity to be recognized as the greatest journalist in human history. But in a matter of seconds, she gives up the story. No internal conflict, no dilemma, no ethical debate. What was missing here was script courage. Courage to put the character in front of a difficult decision. To show that Lois's ambition could clash with her empathy. That the ideal of truth she represents as a journalist would clash with the need to protect a life. This was the opportunity to deepen Lois drastically. Show the dilemma. Show the hesitation. Show the weight of a choice that defines a career. But the movie chooses to bypass all of this and delivers a ready, safe, and artificial answer. Lois simply agrees to keep the secret, and that's it. In Batman vs. Superman, the pattern repeats itself. Lois is facing Superman at his most vulnerable moment. He questions if it's still worth being a hero. He's about to give up everything. And Lois, once again, says nothing relevant. Not a word about what he represents. Not a sentence that shows she doesn't know why she believes in him. No own worldview. The most she offers is a silent presence, unable to sustain any dramatic tension. When Superman says that no one stays good in this world, she doesn't contradict him, challenge him, or emotionally rescue him. This reveals the central point. Amy Adams' version not only lacks personality, she lacks purpose. She is a character who should represent ambition, ethics, conflict, and humanity. But she has been reduced to a neutral, functional figure. A generic love interest, without layers, without a mark. Meanwhile, Rachel Brosnahan's Lois carries within herself all the dilemmas that should have shaped the character's arc in previous versions. She feels guilt, anger, doubt. But she chooses to act, not as a passive partner, but as someone who is also trying to save the world, just in her own way. And this difference in approach is what defines the new DCU. A universe where female characters exist not only to justify the protagonist's drama, but to star in their own dilemmas, their own actions, and their own victories. And all of this culminates in a small but extremely symbolic gesture that may have gone unnoticed by most. It is in this detail that the new couple truly solidifies. There is a moment in the new adaptation where Lois and Clark argue amidst the tension of the investigation that could bring down Lex Luthor. The atmosphere between them is tense. They do not listen to each other. As they argue, the arguments clash head-on, like two trains on opposite tracks. But then, in the midst of the confrontation, Clark stops. He looks at Lois and says that even when she is wrong, she is the only person who makes him think differently. She doesn't respond. just looks away for a second, and smiles. Quickly, almost imperceptibly. This smile is everything that never existed between Cavill and Amy Adams. Not because of the actors, but because they were never given a script that allowed for this kind of nuance. This kind of contained emotional break, without expository dialogue, without grand statements. Just subtext. Just truth. If Lois had been written like this from the beginning of the Snyderverse, the impact would be different. Imagine that same scene where Superman is lost after the explosion at the Capitol, but now with a Lois who not only comforts him, but confronts him. Who says that he has the power to inspire? Yes, but only if he is willing to bleed for what he believes in. Who makes it clear that believing in good is not about saving, it's about resisting. That's what was missing. Someone who challenges Snyder's Superman. Someone who makes him rethink his identity, not just his actions. And furthermore, imagine this Lois in the place of the one who throws the kryptonite spear into the water. This version wouldn't stumble and need to be rescued. She would have hidden the weapon, analyzed the risk, found a parallel solution, maybe even faced Batman with real arguments before the fight. Because this Lois is not a supporting character in the story. She is. There is a second moral vertex within the narrative, and that's what was missing throughout the Snyder arc. Counterweights. The most tragic thing is realizing that the potential was always there. Amy Adams is a powerful actress. Cavill, when well directed, delivers depth. But the absence of a text that treated Lois as a real character, and not just as a convenient emotional link, threw all of that away. Now, with Rachel Brosnahan's version, it is clear how much we have lost over the years, and at the same time, how much we can still gain. Because if James Gunn maintained this level of writing for the rest of the cast, the DCU may have finally found its emotional foundation. And perhaps, for the first time in decades, Lois Lane is at the center of what makes Superman work. And you? Do you think this Lois redefines the character? Or do you still prefer Amy Adams' softer version? Comment below. And if you enjoy comparisons like this, in the next video, we will analyze the 5 greatest achievements of the new Superman, and a dark detail that almost no one noticed.